Welcome to the Simply Authentic podcast with Angie and Tonya, where we will enlighten you with our real estate knowledge, highlight entrepreneurship, and have conversations about your passions, goals, and your struggles. So, here we are. In this episode, we're going to talk about home ownership, why it's important, Tonya and I's individual experience with home ownership. So, Tonya, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about your experience as a homeowner?
Okay. So, I bought my first house at 22. And it was in Abbey Lane subdivision in Springfield. If you're familiar, it's southwest area of Springfield. And I think from my recollection of being a young person and thinking about home ownership, I was getting ready to get married. And Randy and I were lucky enough that his parents had given us a little bit of money for down payment. And so he and I never rented together. We didn't even live anywhere before we got married together. We lived separately in apartments, and it was the plan, right? And I guess probably growing up in the family of builders, it seemed natural. So I know that there's a lot of young people these days that is not a thought on their mind or on their radar whatsoever. But it was for me. So, so we had a 7+% interest rate for all of you naysayers out there that's crazy high. Well, that was normal in 1994. And it was a 2-story house. I believe it was 2,000 square feet and had 5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms.
Wow.
Randy and I thought
we
we had made it. And I think it was a $82,000 or $83,000 house.
Yeah.
So at 22, we were suddenly playing house in this house that we had just purchased. So another shout out to Micheline Ramsey. She was my realtor. And I would say, or I know positively, I have bought and sold 6 homes that I have personally lived in up to this age now. So I've done it a few times. And I mentioned in the last episode that my grandparents set the stage for lots of moving.
Yes.
And I believe they moved 28 times in their lifetime.
That's amazing.
So I wasn't scared of moving. And one thing that I will say to each move that I have had in those 6 moves, I always made money off of whatever house I was selling to move out of, or I kept that house as a rental and I bought another house. So it was a way to build wealth. So what about you?
So not nearly as many homes as you.
Okay.
And I come from a farming background, so we didn't move. We stayed in the same house.
Of course.
So my house burnt when I was in the 6th grade, and we just built back there. So I think as I was growing up, I only lived in 3 homes, and 2 of them were in the same spot because one burnt. So, so that's what I grew up with. And then I went away to college and obviously did not own a house while I was in college. And then I was a bit of a nomad. I did a little couch surfing and rented for a little bit until I finally, at that point, my dad was actually building houses. He was still farming, but we started doing some construction as well.
Yeah.
So I've owned 4 houses. Is that right? Yeah, 4. So my first 2 were brand new construction, and I was the builder on the second one. And interesting side note, and something that frustrates me a lot, I was not allowed to be called the builder of record on those new construction homes, even though I was the general. I wasn't allowed to because I had no prior experience. I also believe it was because I was a woman. I was a young woman who didn't have any experience, so the bank would not loan to me because I didn't have that previous experience. So my dad had to be listed as a general, even though I did all the work.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and then that second home, I didn't intend to stay in it for 14 years like I did, but recession hit,
Right.
things, just weren't moving. So while I intended to build every couple of years and move
Sure.
on, I got stuck in that one house for about 14 years, and that was in Pleasant Hope. And then I moved into Springfield in 2015, and I've lived in Springfield since and owned 2 homes in Springfield. So, but it's like you, I've made money on every home,
Right.
because we obviously are in the market. We understand the
Right.
market. We know when it's good to sell. I sold my house in 2022. Yes. Early 2022. No, I take that back. It was late 21. I didn't have to sell. I didn't need to sell, but I could see the writing on the
Right.
wall.
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to make more money at that time than
Right.
I ever could because of the market. So I took advantage of the market and got out of that home and rented for
Yeah.
a little while until I found a house to buy.
So let's talk about that theory for a second, because we have been in the best real estate markets we have ever seen, right?
exactly.
In 21 and 22 for sure.
Yeah.
So how many clients or your agent's clients did you see and hear that happening? People selling for really no good reason other than
Absolutely.
I can make a ton of money
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
was that a prominent conversation in your office meetings?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They were always, we had a number of people and that's one thing that led to the high rent rate, is because there were so many people that were selling to take advantage of the equity that they had in their home, and they ended up with nowhere to go. But
Right.
they ended up renting. My brother and sister-in-law lived in my parents' basement and took advantage of selling their home with 4 kids, no less.
Oh,
but
wow.
but you understood that again, the value would probably never be as high as it was
Yeah.
in those years, the previous years to this one, and that can lead into a conversation about understanding, and we as realtors, really, that's our job. We have to understand what the market is, and we have to
Right.
educate our buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
And it was one of those opportunities for us to reach out to people we had worked with in the past who maybe weren't thinking about selling, but when we did a comparative market analysis and could tell them what they were going to make on their home, they figured it out.
Right.
They figured out where to go and how to make that work, so their family could have a little nest egg.
Right.
Because while we all own homes, and we all have housing and it's our home, we also need to think of it as wealth building. It's one of the best ways to build wealth.
Absolutely. And we always say in this business that it is the largest investment that you might ever make. So
Right.
I would say, you might agree with this, probably 9, maybe 8 out of 10 clients of mine are buying and selling houses not as a business, but as homeowners.
Yeah.
And they're not investors, if you will.
Yeah.
They're just homeowners that are moving from one house to another, typically because of change. So a lot of our business comes from, or repeat clients come from, change in their lives. So death and divorce and babies and just growing out of your house. We see a lot of repeat customers and
If you do the business right, you see
exactly.
repeat. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother topic. But so in turn, they're building wealth. And you mentioned staying current. In order to be able to educate our clients in the best way, you have to be in the business. So people who, may not be working real estate full time may not have their pulse on exactly what is happening in the current market. And I can say, I remember last year, after interest rates started to go up. So about August, I was having different conversations with my agents, and that has continued into this year, that the market was changing sometimes weekly.
Right.
But if you went a month without really being involved in, showing or listing or negotiating or whatever we do day to day, you didn't know what was happening. And so it was really important to educate my agents who have different volume levels. Some are really busy, some are not so busy. But for them to understand, this is what you need to tell the consumer. This is what is happening, currently. And I think that although we've been low on supply since 2020. So
Yes.
that supply hardship really started in 2020 when there was a lockdown, right? But people still have to sell. They still have to sell and they still have to buy. They get transferred and they have all those life events I mentioned happen no matter what's happening in the world, a pandemic or not.
Right.
But once we got to the 22 market and things started slowing down because of interest rates, then the sellers really put the pause on selling because they have a 2 or 3% interest rate.
Right.
And they started considering how much more money it was going to cost them to be a homeowner of a new home. And by new, I just mean a different home. So yes, they could make a lot of money, but the flip side of that is you're reinvesting and spending that much money to go into another home, and you might not be getting the same payment, interest rate. Taxes have went up horribly. So I think that understanding all of that, because if we have a client that calls us in the midst of all of this starting to happen, we can't just pretend like, oh, it's business as usual. It's been the craziest year ever. And 2022 was the craziest year ever. However, it came to a screeching halt quickly. And understanding those things is our job, not only as realtors and the clients we're serving, but for us to educate our agents and to keep them focus forward on what they should be telling their clients.
Absolutely. I mean, we are in a service industry, so it's very important that we stay up to date on market trends and the market shift, and that's what we do for our clients.
Yeah.
And it changes all the time. And going out and meeting with clients who don't have an understanding, they know that their neighbor down the street sold in 21 for X amount of dollars, and they think they're going to get the same for theirs.
Right.
Now, pricing has continued to rise, but that's basic supply and demand.
Sure.
Because we do not have the supply. So pricing continues to rise. We still have a big deficit in terms of our inventory.
We do.
And so it's trying to work with both buyers and sellers to figure out how we can bridge that gap and how we can put their house on the market and be creative in ways to find them a way to move forward. Because like you said, life events, people have to move, have to sell.
Right.
And there are still a lot of buyers out there, and they're going to pay, you mentioned 7 or 7.5 or whatever it was when you first paid. The 30-year average is 8%.
Right.
So we still, even when you bought your first home, it was still below the 30-year average. So, and we still continue to be that today.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit. We've told you our stories in terms of our home ownership. Let's talk a little bit about why home ownership is important, what it means to a family, and maybe a little bit about, as you age and at what different times in your life it's important to move or be a homeowner. We work with a lot of first-time home buyers. We, no matter what stage you are in this business, you're working with first-time home buyers. So, which require a lot more education and help. Which I love.
Yes,
I love.
me
That's
too.
that's
Love
one
first-time
reason
home
we've
buyers.
both been in the business for over 20 years. And we talk about our passion for the industry. And a lot of that stems from being of service to someone who is going to make the biggest investment of their life
Yeah.
to that point, and helping them navigate the transaction and fulfill whatever goal that they have that they're working on.
Right, right. So I have a favorite first-time homebuyer story from last
great.
year.
Yeah.
It's my daughter Madden. So Madden is 22, and she came to work with me in 21. I think she was licensed January of 21. And I was in need of an assistant because my last one had had a baby. And so she was still in college and wasn't sure what she wanted to be when she grew up. So she came to work for me. And so talking about how you just naturally go buy a house. Well, of course, I'm talking about it with her. Now she's living and breathing it every day. And we just started putting together, prices probably aren't going to come down. They're probably going to continue to go up, which is a national forecast.
Yes.
And so we found her a house. She became a first-time buyer. And it was really exciting as her mom to be able to see her at 22 buy a house like I did at 22. And believe it or not, her interest rate was still lower than mine at 5 something. I can't remember what we locked her in at. But, we lived with 2 and 3% interest rates for so many years, and 4%. That was just so normal. I don't remember feeling like 5 was outrageous, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that when especially the seasoned buyers, so first-time buyers, they don't have any history of an interest rate other than what their parents are telling them, probably, or their friends are telling them. So they don't have any history to go off of. So I think it's important for us as realtors to remember what their story is and to ask them those questions because it is impactful on how they're going to feel in this process and getting that payment figured out of the gate. I mean, that is imperative now with higher interest rates, just because if you have somebody that was, maybe pre-approved a year or two or years earlier at a different rate, that payment can really change.
Right.
So back to the importance of home ownership, I think that, if this is the largest investment you're making in your lifetime, and 8 out of 10 people it is, you and I can't say, when we're helping our clients, we can't say, you're going to make a ton of money on this in the future, because we don't have our crystal ball working or plugged in at the time.
Exactly.
So we know, because we don't only speak from our own experience of the houses we've owned and what's happened with them. We see our clients call us again and say, oh, we grew out of our house, or we're getting transferred to Colorado, or whatever the case might be. And so we're there to witness their joys of being able to make money and to, they've lived there long enough that they've turned that over and the market's increased, or maybe they've done a lot of upgrades to their house or updating. You don't necessarily upgrade and updating are different things, right? Different terminology.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me tell me one thing you tell your first-time buyers and why home ownership is important to a new client of yours. What is that one thing that you would point out to them?
Well, it's not our job to help them figure out where to buy.
No.
Right. But one thing, when I see time and time again with brand new homeowners, they're thinking about forever. They're thinking,
Absolutely.
I'm going to buy this house. I'm going to live in it for 20 years. I'm going to raise my babies here. I'm going to whatever. And I'm looking at it more as an investment. I'm trying to protect them and the house that they buy, the location they buy in. I'm looking at things like, is it going to need a roof in 5 years? And can they afford it in 5 years? I'm looking at the HVAC system. I'm looking at all those things while they're falling in love with the house. And I feel that it's my job to coach them. I mean, now I think the average time in a house has gone up to like 7 or 8 years, and it may be slightly higher. It used to be 5 years. For a long time, the average time in one home was 5 years.
Right.
And now it's gone up some, again, because of COVID and some other things. People are able to work from home and that kind of thing. They don't have to move for a job as much. But still, it is not going to be their forever home.
No.
And I have to try and have that conversation with them that they need to look at it as, and what if you lose a job in 2 years and you have to sell this home and you are stuck paying too much in a location that'll never bring the same value and that kind of thing. So we have those conversations, and I'm trying to educate them and let them fall in love with the house at the same time, but making sure that they're looking at it from a perspective of an investment. And should something happen, God forbid, that they have to get rid of this house and they call me, I don't want to have to say, I told you not to buy it. Or if you buy this one, don't call me again. Just kidding. But, I want them to make good, solid decisions, and they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know what that is unless we're there to help guide them.
Right. And many times they do have family helping or friends advising.
If they're lucky, yeah.
And they can also give them those tips and have opinions on those things. But really, sometimes it is in our hands to educate. And I think that most first-time home buyers oftentimes leave the experience with a holy cow. Like, they had no idea what all this terminology was and what the title company did and what an appraiser does and why that's important for your loan process. And there really is a lot to it when you are green and you don't know anything about it. And Angie, what I'm hoping that over the course of this podcast, I'm hoping that we can encourage homeownership with all of our young viewers and listeners, and also those people who have maybe they've come onto a hardship and they've been renting now for 5 years because something happened with a job or with medical expense or something that they had to sell, and they're renting again. Rents have went up 28% in the last year. That's a fourth of your income, right? So we have to be mindful that not everybody wants to be a homeowner, and that's okay. There are lots of rentals out there, and there's a place for those. But we also want to encourage and educate people of why they would purchase their first home, why they would get into investing, why you might be going to college at MSU, Kate, and your parents thought about at one time, maybe ran it around in their mind to buy a rental house so that you could rent it and they could have an investment property while you were there in college. And then your brother came. So now they've got 8 years that they could have had an investment. And after 8 years, you can usually turn that investment pretty well. So there's just so many things about home ownership, Angie.
Yeah, there really is. And I think we have to keep in mind, we help a lot of military folks move, and and sometimes they've gone through the military and they're maybe 40 before they're buying their first home.
Right.
So first-time home buyers are not necessarily right out of college or very young.
Right.
And the older you get when you do new things, the more scary it is.
Yeah.
So we have to keep that in mind and know that you could be a first-time home buyer at any point in your life. The other thing that you kind of touched on, we saw a lot of that coming out of the recession. People had to do short sales and they had to do foreclosures, and they get this mindset that they'll never own a home again.
Yeah.
And 4 or 5 years past the recession, then we were talking to buyers and getting them approved, even if they had a foreclosure. I mean, it doesn't mean the end of the world if you have had one of those situations. Lived through medical debt is another one that I see cause a lot of hardship. And just because something like that has happened, please don't let that derail you from seeking us out and talking to a lender about getting pre-approved, because there are ways to make that happen again. You might need some counseling, some credit counseling or whatever, but
Absolutely.
I just want to make that point that you should never feel and you're not going to get judged, because lots of people had to do that during the recession. Lots of people, lost their jobs during COVID, and maybe, had a real impact on whatever income they were making pre-COVID. And, again, conversations are free. How many times have I said that now already?
They are.
I say that every podcast, but they really are. And there are people out there who want to help, realtors that want to help, lenders who want to help guide you back on the path to home ownership. If you have had some kind of thing derail you.
Setbacks happen all the time.
Absolutely.
And you and I see that entirely too often.
Right.
But it's always nice to have someone who can own a home again after a hardship.
Yeah.
Because life happens, and you can't control things that, that happen medically or job-wise.
Right.
So,
Right.
So Angie, I think in wrapping up this episode, we could probably forecast that we will talk about home ownership again at some point.
I'm pretty sure we will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You can learn all things from this podcast. So, as we, any final thoughts as we end this podcast?
No, I think we just need to, again, reiterate that we plan on talking real estate a lot, but we're going to have, hopefully our next episode, we are going to have an entrepreneur on that we can talk to in studio and get their take on their why, bringing us back to really the reason why we're doing this. So we hope that you'll tune in for that.
We like to end every podcast with a funny story.
We
so,
sure do.
Angie, I hope you're prepared. If you're not, I have another one.
Well, funny. So early on in my real estate career, I went out to list a home, and it was out near where I grew up. So I felt very comfortable doing the CMA and getting everything together. I knew right where it was. I'm a big person. I want to be prepared, whatever I'm doing. So preparation is key for me. So I was prepared with all my information. Like I said, knew right where the house was. And this is more of an uncomfortable story probably than funny, but I walked in, and I don't know how to describe this. I walked in, and the house, it was like walking into 10 people who had been smoking right at the door, and it was like you couldn't even see into the house because it was so, the smoke just
foggy.
lingered. Yes, foggy. And it just lingered there. Now, I'm a non-smoker. I have nothing against people who smoke, but when you do smoke in your house, it creates an issue.
It does.
So I walk in and I sit down, and both husband and wife are smoking, and we talk about it. And if you don't know this about houses that are smoked in, the walls are yellow, the ceiling is yellow, everything is yellow. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm a brand new realtor, pretty much, two years in maybe, and I have never lived in a home that has been smoked in. Right. So I'm sitting there thinking, why is everything yellow in this house? I don't understand. And I just didn't know. I was just too naive and young to know why everything was yellow. And but I knew that this house was going to be a real challenge to sell because it was so it was just so, the smell was so bad. And of course, if you're a smoker, you don't know, you don't recognize that it is. And so I don't even know what those people said to me, because I literally sat there going, why is everything so yellow? I don't understand why everything's so yellow.
Plus, your brain was probably foggy from all the cloud of smoke you were sitting in.
Probably. And I pride myself on being diplomatic, and I was diplomatic. And I think I just said, I'm not going to be able to list your house because I have a bad allergy to smoke. And so I'm not going to be able to list your house. But and they were okay with that.
Yeah.
They were fine.
Yeah,
because
there are other realtors out there.
Exactly. And it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But then I went right away and talked to my broker and said, this house was so yellow. And he said, you don't know why it was yellow? And he was a smoker. So
He understood.
he understood.
Okay, makes sense. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that smoky story. So we will look forward to the next podcast. See you guys next time, and make sure you follow and share on social media.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Simply Authentic podcast. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Be sure to listen to us on your favorite podcasting app.